And that's, to me, part of what's wrong. We got, on the one hand, these anti-man, anti-masculinity forces that are fucking causing massive problems in our society at a global scale. And on the other hand, we've got these false prophets that are teaching men about a masculinity that isn't really very helpful to them. Not at all.
Welcome to the Derelict Podcast. For the disparaged, depleted, and delinquent souls trying to find our way, we're talking about the scary part of the journey, where we don't know how it'll end. Let's be free to face our fucking failures in real time as the most unadulterated, truest version of who we are. No sugarcoating. Welcome to the shit show, you derelict.
Welcome back to the Derelict Podcast. This is Josh Abandonato, and today we have a very, very special guest, Nicky Ballou. Nicky, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on the show, brother. It's an honor to be here, man. God bless you.
Yeah, God bless you as well, sir. So, Nicky, how did we meet? Well, we met online. We chatted a little bit. We had an interesting conversation. Then we ended up having a phone conversation, and Nicky had some really interesting viewpoints that I wanted to make sure that all of you that are either listening or viewing get to be exposed to. He has a bit of a unique situation. He is an immigrant from the Middle East. He is an entrepreneur. He has helped many, many entrepreneurs over the years grow their business. He is a two-time New York Times best-selling author for which books, Nicky?
The Great Patriot Protest and Boycott book and the Great Patriot Boycott book.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. Well, I'd love to hear more about those as we chat. He also is a top 10 iTunes podcast host, which technically means he's better at this than me. So I love to have people like that. Always love to learn from the best, Nicky. So thanks for being here, man. Really excited to have a conversation with you. Maybe we'll jump into the sovereign man and a few other things because your bio just goes on and on and on. But in the meantime, where do you want to start? You want to chat us? Maybe where we can start is, you know, the main purpose of this podcast is to deal with things as we're going through them, whether that be failures, struggles, etc. You and I had a really interesting conversation, I think, at least, about masculinity, what masculinity looks like in the world today. And every country obviously views that a little differently. Both of us now are, Nick, are you in the States now? Where do you live?
I'm in Canada.
Currently?
I'm in
You're
Toronto,
in Canada.
Canada. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe Canada and I don't know, what from your perspective, are Canada and the United States kind of similar in general as far as masculinity views? Is there big differences?
There are differences. I wouldn't say they're big differences.
Okay. So it's more kind of categorically, because I would assume where you're from the Middle East, maybe has some big differences versus what we see over here. So
100%.
Yeah, so we're going to get into
100%.
that. I've been to, I've been just a little bit in the Middle East, not much myself, but I experienced a little bit of that. So what's the point of this podcast today? Well, today we are going to talk about masculinity. We're going to talk about quote unquote toxic masculinity. Is that even a thing? We're going to delve into that. We're going to talk about healthy masculinity or unhealthy masculinity, or do we just throw it all out the window and say all of it's evil? I don't know. Let's chat about that. So, Nicky, what made you interested in joining us today to have this conversation about masculinity? Where do you want to start?
I really appreciate you having me on. I really appreciate you asking the question. So I think we're living in a time where manhood, masculinity in the West, at least, are under assault. Okay. Yeah. There are voices that are saying masculinity is bad, wrong, toxic. There are voices that are saying women need a man like a fish needs a bicycle and things like that. And because of that, a lot of men are taking cover. They're ducking, man. They're going, man, is there something wrong with me just because I was born a man? And that is screwing up a lot of men, screwing up a lot of young boys. And my take on it all is that's a load of hogwash. Okay. I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I believe God created the world. And I believe God created us in a particular way for a particular reason. And I know not everybody believes in God. And, that's your choice. We live in what is still a free country. And you have a right to believe or not believe as you see fit. But for those who believe, do you think that God makes junk? Do you think that God makes mistakes? Because my take on it is because God doesn't make junk and he didn't start with you. Okay. That's my number one take on it. Right. And the other thing is, why over the last 60 odd years has there been a sea change, a transformation in societal attitudes about men, manhood, masculinity, women, womanhood, femininity? Why? Did this just come out of the ether? At first, I thought, yeah, this was just a natural evolution. But several years ago, I was scrolling on Amazon because I read a lot. I read over 100 books a year. And I saw a book just pop up in my Amazon feed. And the name of the book was Hard Times Create Strong Men. Okay. It's written by a fella named Stefan Arnio. Now, Stefan's dead. He passed away in 2020 at the ripe old age of 33. Okay. And in this book, this book is close to 800 pages long. So I want you to get, Josh, this is a long book written by a man who was 30 at the time, and he wrote it in 11 days. 800 pages in 11 days.
Wow.
So he believed that he was divinely inspired and the information was not his. It just came through him. And I'll tell you this is one of the most important books I've ever read. And I'm a man who's read close to 5,000 books. Okay. In this book, Stefan talks about the history of the world, but the history of men, of manhood, of the difference between the two sexes. And something he said was, history goes through 80-year cycles. They call them turnings. You may have heard, some popular sayings out there in the world, like the fourth turning, right? So there's a poem that was written by a man named Jeff Michael Hoff, who after reading this book, I had him on my podcast. And it goes something like this. You may have heard this poem before. He said, hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. And then the cycle goes again. And he says that roughly every 80 years, we go from hard times creating strong men to weak men creating hard times. And then the cycle begins again. And he starts to demonstrate this throughout human history. He talks about ancient times, Roman times. He talks about World War II, to today, 1940 to 2020, roughly. And I'm reading this and I'm going, wow, there's a lot of truth to this. And then I'm reading this book.
Just real quick. So what phase are we in right now, do you think?
We're in the fourth turning, I believe. And weak men right now are in charge and they've created hard times. I think if you look around the world, you would probably agree, right? We've got, listen, not to make this a political show, but the current occupant of the White House ain't exactly what you'd call a strong man. Okay. I don't think anybody would argue that that's a mental giant over there. Right. So
yeah, I don't really like getting political on here very often, but I'm going to say that he's incompetent and should not be in office.
Thank you. Like I said, not to get political here, but that's a fact, right? And I'm in Canada, and the fellow who's running our country, God, he's an idiot. He's an idiot. He's an idiot.
Yeah.
Like people who supported him in the past right now are saying he's an idiot. He needs to go, and that's the truth. So we are in that time.
And just for the listeners, the viewers, however you're hearing or watching this right now, I just want to make something really clear. I think that both Nicky and I are trying to express here. We're not trying to be political. This is not a Republican, Democrat, whatever party you're a part of sort of comment, right, Nicky? We're mainly just saying, where are the strong men that used to lead these countries? Because we're not seeing it right now in our countries. That's for sure.
No, they're not. They're not there. They're not there. And Is this true in every country in the world? No, there's some countries that have very strong leaders, but in the West, man, we are hurting. We are definitely hurting right now. And so, but these hard times are creating a whole bunch of strong men. So you're seeing at the grassroots a lot of strong men come to the table. So I mean, if you look at some of the key cultural figures that are stepping up, there's Patrick Bet David, who's a fellow Iranian like myself. He has the Valuetainment podcast. He's stepping forward very unapologetically and making some powerful statements. In the United States, there's a strong woman in the former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, showing a lot of ovaries, as they say, stepping forward and really leading the way. There's people like the great Jocko Willink, David Goggins. So there are culturally, these hard times are creating some strong men and some strong women and bringing them to the table. But this is a big part of what's going on in the world.
One thing that maybe we should have clarified at the beginning that I kind of want to clarify now. So when we talk about, so men and masculinity are not the same thing, right? Let's just throw that out there. For anybody that's listening, being a man and being masculine or having masculine traits is not the same thing. Women have masculine traits, men have masculine traits, women have feminine traits, men have feminine traits, right? They're in both of us. So when we are defining kind of strong men, are you focusing more on gender, right? Like you are a man, or sexuality, or I know gender's elusive these days, but being a biological, yeah, we won't even get into that one. We won't even get into that one. So are you talking like a biological man, or are you talking the masculine traits? What do you feel is
I'm talking what these days is a biological man, a masculine man. So there's an author by the name of David Data. He wrote a book called The Way of the Superior Man, and in it he says that 80% of men are masculine primarily. 10% of them have both masculine and feminine traits equally, and 10% of them are primarily feminine. And the same with women. 80% of women are primarily feminine, and 10% of them have masculine and feminine traits equal, and 10% of them are primarily masculine. But anyways, let's put that aside. Let's come back to this conversation here. So the other thing that Stefan Aarnio said in his book is that there are people in power that for all of history have been attempting to hold on to power by messing with us. Okay, like bottom line, by messing with us. Talks about it happening in Roman times, right? And he talks about this whole conversation around, genders. He said he wrote out 63 genders, different names for genders. My head hurt just reading it. And he said, you think this is new? You think this is 2024? And he said, you'd be wrong. This has happened before. And I'm like, really? When and where? And then he gave us a short history lesson of ancient Rome, late Roman Empire, after the Roman Republic. Gender fluidity was a thing in Rome. It was a thing. And the folks that were encouraging it were some of the people in power, because they didn't want strong men around to be able to challenge them being in power. If men were strong,
interesting.
They would like say, fuck this shit, and they'd go and take these dudes out. And so Stefan Aarnio's hypothesis, which I agree with, is that the whole gender fluidity conversation today is part of what's been aimed at men for the last 60 years to keep them weak, because strong men don't put up with shit. Don't put up with tyrants taking their basic rights away. And if you have the population going at each other instead of going at the bastards in power that are keeping us down with fucked up inflation, with housing prices going through the roof so young men and young women can't buy houses and have to live in mom and dad's place, then they're not going to raise up the pitchforks and go burn these people out of their big mansions and kill them and take over. Because that's what
classic misdirection, right? Don't focus on us. It's not us. Why don't you guys go fight each other?
Oh yeah, fight about gender. Yeah, that's cool. Fight about gender. Let's fight more about gender. And you think about this. This is insane, but it's exactly what's happening. Look, men who were very close to me had people in their lives who suffered from gender dysphoria and eventually medically transitioned to the other gender, right? One was a boy who, when he was a young man in his 20s, decided that, after years of like, whoa, I don't know who I am, what I am, I'm really a woman, and had surgery and became a woman. Sadly, killed herself, after a few years. The other one was a young girl who said, I'm a boy. And, went through that whole process and transitioned from being a girl to a boy. Now, far be it from me to tell people what to do. We live in a free society. But I'm telling you this, in my opinion, the fellow who was in his early 20s decided to do this, no problems with that. The 13-year-old girl who said, you know what, I think I'm a boy, I'm thinking this could be something that might go away once you get through teenage years, because a lot of teenagers, myself included, go through a lot of questioning of themselves in a lot of ways.
It's part of, every teenager has to, right? It's part of the developmental stage. It's part of what you do.
Yes. I sure am glad that nobody encouraged me to go cut my dick off when I was 13.
Seriously, I agree,
Like
Nicky.
straight up. Like when I'm 25, if I decided I wanted to do that, that's on me. But 13,
You're an adult. Do whatever you want.
Yeah. So, to me.
So can I ask you a question about that real quick then?
Sure.
Going back to what you said before from the other book, which I thought was really interesting, the statistic that 80% of men are primarily masculine and 80% of women are primarily feminine, right? And then there's that 10% and 10% swing on both of those. Do you? And obviously, there's no study to prove this next question that I'm going to ask you, and maybe we're not the experts, but I'm just curious. Do you think a lot of what's happening right now is from that 10% that just feels like, if I'm a man, just feels more feminine, or do you think it's just so ingrained in society and culture and everything else that they're just convincing people that they actually are like that? What do you think?
I don't know. I got to be honest with you. I don't want to make a comment based on what'll be a wild ass guess, but I will tell you this. I think this whole gender conversation is led by a very, very tiny minority. I don't think it's 10%. I think it's 1/10 of 1%, if that. I think they're well funded by evil people in power who are using them for their own nefarious purposes. And it's my considered opinion that there's no freaking way that these people would have been given a voice, given a microphone, given money to push their agenda onto children in our schools without some serious people in power with money and backing giving them the wherewithal to do this. Because 20 years ago, if you said, I think we should go to schools and tell little kids to question their gender, they'd tell you you're fucking nuts. And they'd have been right.
Yeah,
they'd been right.
I mean, honestly, they'd probably put you. I was just. It's a busy day for me, and I just got off another recording of another podcast episode, and one of the things that we talked about in that was it was all about mental illness, and years ago, that person would have been institutionalized.
Yeah.
Right? They would have been put into a mental institution. So how did we go from putting that person in a mental institution to now just saying we need to support them in that decision?
No, we don't need to support them in that decision. They are going through a mental crisis at the very least, and they may be suffering from a mental disease. And a little kid is just going through very natural confusion. And we should help kids navigate their feelings and come out the other side until they become adults. And at that point, they're going to have had enough life experience, their brains will have been fully developed, and they'll be able to make a good decision. But there's no such thing as a fucking trans kid. That's a load of bullshit. And the people that are pushing that are evil. And the people that are pushing drag queen story hour, where basically men dressed as women prostitutes are shaking their gonads in front of little kids' faces, need to go to jail for, grooming and pedophilia, because that's what they're doing. That's insanity. And it's my opinion that part of being a man in this day and
Are
age
you
is,
are you a yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Nikki, but are you a dad?
yeah, 2 sons.
Yeah, I am too. I am too. And I just, in any other context, and I agree with you, by the way, with what you just said, but in any other context, if you went up to just any average parent that cares about their children and you said, hey, can we take your child to a strip club? The answer is going to be no. Can we take you
And
to
I'll
a
punch you in the
lingerie shop?
face.
Can we take
And
you?
I'll punch you in the
Yeah,
face.
exactly. Like,
Yeah.
fuck no, man. You can't fucking take my kids to go see something like that. But then somehow, if it's a
And
transgender person, yeah, but somehow if it's a transgender person at a library, it's okay. Like, what the fuck?
That's fucked, man. It's
Yeah,
beyond
I
fucked,
agree.
and this shit's got to stop. And honestly, it's part of why strong men are rising up and standing up against this. Uh, you know, and if you want to know the origins of how this came to be in the West, the answer is really simple. There's a book called Willing Accomplices by a man named Kent Clisby. Rhymes with Frisbee, Clizbe, Kent Clisby. Kent used to be a CIA case officer, and he used his skills to go do some research. And I'm going to tell you flat out, this is not a well-written book. This man is not a literary genius, but you will not be able to put it down after you get through the first 10, 15 pages. You just won't be able to. You'll just like read, riveted, because what he has to say is so compelling. And he said that the reason America is in this fucked up, politically correct, cultural Marxist space today is not because of what's happening today. It's because of what happened 110 years ago. In 1917, Vladimir Lenin and his cohorts overthrew the Tsar in Russia and established the world's first communist state. Shortly after doing so, his vision, Marxism-Leninism, was to make the world a one-world communist state. And he realized that he wouldn't just be able to do that. For him to be able to overthrow the governments of the world, he had to first defeat who he called his main adversary, the United States of America. Because America is a powerful country, and he realized that he would never be able to beat America in a straight-up fight. Never, ever, ever. America was too strong. But he also realized that he could weaken America from within. How? Well, by sending his agents into the United States to begin the so-called march through the institutions, to actually weaken America's institutions from within. And so he had a German communist named Willy Münzenberg, and Willy was tasked by the forerunner to the KGB, the Cheka, to go to America, go to Western countries, and recruit agents and begin weakening the institutions. And in particular, Willy thought that there were three major types of institutions he would want to infiltrate and weaken. And this was a decades-long process. The first was academia, school system, K through 12 universities. The second was media, newspapers, eventually radio, television. And the third was storytelling, movies, television. And Kent showed school books from American K through 12 schools in 1910 versus 2010. The 1910 books were overtly patriotic, pro-American, and the 2010 books were not. They were overtly anti-American. Movies in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, most of them were overtly pro-American. In the 70s, some started to become less pro-American. There was still a lot of pro-American movies, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. In the 2010s, mid-2010s, it really started to shift. They're not pro-American anymore. They're actually anti-American. They're pushing a radical, ideology, basically transgenderism. They're pushing LGBTQ ideology. They're pushing America's bad ideology. It's just where it's at. And newspapers, which don't exist anymore, but back in the day, newspapers, radio, television, internet, a lot of the traditional mainstream, mainline ones, they no longer are pro-American. But I've gone and read newspapers from the 40s and 50s. Man, they were absolutely pro-American. So all
Absolutely,
this
there
over
were. Yeah,
time shifted.
magazines too, and everything else. Yeah, I mean,
Everything.
and you could obviously you could take it into social media today. Clearly, social media didn't exist back then, but you look at social media today, and a lot, it's the same. I mean, you know,
It's the
my
same.
even I could even think about yeah. So anyway, that being said, so how does that then translate to? So is the main reason you think that this is happening? You as you said before, is because if we create or anyone creates a society of weak men that lose their masculine traits or somehow lose them along the way. They don't know where they are. They're somewhere, right? That now we can control easier.
100%, brother. They're easier to control. Now, in the 80s, a man defected from Soviet Russia to the United States. His name is Yuri Bezmenov. There is a long form video of him being interviewed on YouTube. And he basically said, you guys think you're winning the Cold War. The Cold War is just a battle. You're winning this battle. You are destined to lose the war against communism. And you know what his job was? He was a KGB officer charged with country destabilization. Country
Oh wow.
destabilization. He went into countries to destabilize
So he knows how to
them.
do it. He knows how to do it.
He laid out how it's being done. So you got to read what he wrote. Like he talks about how what you do is you start attacking the founding myths of a country. You start saying that the people who were the founders, these were all bad people. They were all evil people. You start making people hate their country because then they're dismoored from the familiar things that make them believe that they're part of something good, right? And you start to attack anybody who speaks out against you. And it's a 15, 20-year generational process. And he said within 3 generations, we'll have filled your kids with such crap in their heads that they're going to overthrow your country for us. You look at a lot of younger people in America today, they're not very pro-American. You know, they are standing up for a series of values that say America's bad, America's wrong. And these are not men that are going to fight to keep America, the society, America, the idea strong. And if you are interested in keeping what I believe is the one indispensable nation in the world, the most important nation, the only nation that truly is a bulwark against darkness and is a stand for light, you cannot fail to notice this and be committed to do something to shift this around. Because if America goes, my friend, the world is going to sink into 1,000 years of fucking darkness. Don't kid yourself. It will happen. When the Roman Empire finally fell, what happened? We descended into the Dark Ages in 473 AD until about the Renaissance, the 1400s. 1,000 years of darkness in Europe. It's about to happen again unless we stop.
You know, it's really interesting to hear you say that also, specifically as a Middle Eastern man. Help me understand that. I mean, how are you so committed to? I mean, we're using the term America probably pretty loosely. You're in Canada. I'm in the United States of America. We're kind of talking about this whole area, right? Why? Why this area versus like where you're from in the Middle East? Where are you from in the Middle East, by the way?
I'm from Iran. America is the one indispensable nation in the world. It is the one nation that has always been a beacon for liberty. People all over the globe. And I don't think native-born Americans truly understand this. But America is a shining beacon of hope for the world. There is the example of America. There is that it's a democracy. There is that it is a nation where freedom exists. There is all the possibilities for prosperity. It is something that people around the world look at. Even those that say they hate America, they'd love to move here and live here. And that's the bottom freaking line. You know, in his second inaugural address, Abraham Lincoln said that it was his fervent desire that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth, and that America remained the last best hope for mankind. You ever want to get goosebumps? You ever want to understand what kind of men made this country? You ever want to be proud? Go read Abraham Lincoln's speeches. Go read his most
For sure, man.
compelling
I've read a lot of
speeches.
them, and they're amazing.
You will cry. You will be proud. You will stand tall. Because this man, everybody says, oh yeah, he wanted to keep the Union together. Damn straight he wanted to keep the Union together. But why the hell was the Union splitting apart? Because there was a part of the Union that wanted to fucking keep men in bondage. And there was another part that said, no, no more. We're not living up to our ideals. There's no other country in the history of the fucking world that has ever looked at itself, admonished itself for not living up to its ideals, and then stepped forward and laid out blood and treasure. 600,000 men died in the Civil War when America was just 50 million people. So we're talking like well over 1% of the fucking population died because America said, hey, we're not living up to our ideals.
Yeah,
You think
amazing.
of it. Can you imagine another country on the planet that would do this? Because there isn't one. There isn't one.
You
Okay.
know what it reminds me of too, Nicky, is that you said something really interesting to me on the phone when we were prepping for this episode today. And we were talking a bit about, I kind of want to shift the focus a little bit to toxic masculinity. And don't jump on it yet, because I have a feeling I know what you're going to say. But I think it's really, you said something interesting, and it was kind of something that you brought up, which fascinated me, and I've been thinking about ever since we had that conversation a few weeks ago. And that was that part of the reason you're seeing, and I don't want to use your words, so correct me after I say this if I say it wrong, but what I heard from you is part of the reason why, especially a lot of young men are going after these, kind of toxic masculine folks, the guys that are, all doing all their shit, which is not, by the way, true masculinity. So let's talk about that as well. Let's talk about true masculinity versus these guys that have, jacked up pickup trucks and they work out and then they yell at people and they abuse people. That's not masculinity. But that being said, you said something to the effect of, these guys that are doing that are some of the only people right now that are actually standing up for masculinity. In other words, they're some of the only people that are actually saying, hey, masculinity is actually a good thing. Now, it's misdirected a lot of the ways that they use it, because I don't want to learn masculinity from some abusive piece of shit. That's not true masculinity. But tell us a little bit about kind of your thoughts on these kind of toxic masculine folks and why guys are listening to them.
So one, I'm just going to come out and say it. There's no such thing as toxic masculinity. That's a phrase invented by the left to shut men down, get them to shut up, get them to think, oh, there's something wrong with me. And
so what would you call it?
Term. I think it's a sexist term. I think it's an evil term. I think it's the equivalent of the N-word. So let's fucking do away with that. Number one. Number two.
But real quick before we go on though, what would you call it? So what would you call a guy that is, quote, showing masculinity, but that's being an abusive piece of shit? Like, what would you call that instead of toxic masculinity?
So look, dude, abusive. Abusive's a heavy word. Okay. So let's like, to me, abusive is a dude who goes beating up people weaker than himself, like literally physically kicking the shit out of them. There's not a lot of men that do that. Those aren't, they're men. They're not good men. They're shitheads. And from my point of view, I don't know, if I saw a man beating up a woman or a child on the street, I'd fucking punch him.
Absolutely. Kick his ass.
I'd punch him. I'd kick the shit out of him. I'd call other men and say, this motherfucker's beating on a woman. Get over here. Get in some licks. Right? And he'd deserve everything he got. So let's be clear.
And by the way, real quick, just for everyone listening or viewing right now, what I want you to hear from what Nicky's saying is, I believe, and again, this is an opinion, but I believe what you just said, Nicky, is showing true masculinity. That guy was not showing true masculinity when he was beating the shit out of somebody, but you standing up for that woman to me, is what true masculinity is all about. If you're not going to do that, who's fucking going to do it? And then everybody's just going to get, raped and murdered and beat up and destroyed and everything else if there aren't any true men to stand up.
Yeah, amen, amen. So that's number one. And number two is these dudes that are, and I want to call them dudes and not men, okay? Because I draw a distinction between men, dudes, guys, boys, whatever. Men are men and the rest are not. Let's just leave it at that. These dudes that are coming out and standing up for men and manhood and masculinity, I commend them for that. But a lot of them are saying some really fucked up, stupid shit that is bad for men, bad for young men to think this is the way I should go and live my life. So I'll tell you an example. There's this whole movement called MGTOW, men going their own way. These are men that have stopped dating women, basically. Stopped it because they go, oh my God, I'm never going to get a fair shake from the system. If I marry her, she'll take, the system's going to, she divorces me, she'll take everything I got, won't even be able to see my kid, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, the system's rigged against men. That's the truth. And you go to a family court, it's going to be tougher on you. But there are people that are starting to see that and stand up for men in that regard. And that's a fact as well. And if men stop dating women, marrying women, forming families with women, we don't have a fucking society. We don't have a fucking society. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you nuts? Men going their own way, becoming a thing, is the worst fucking thing that could happen. What we need is men to stand up, tell these fuckwads to stop attacking men and slam them down. And we need good, solid, sensible men to take over the institutions of government and of major societal organizations. That's what we need to do. That's the fight we need to have. Not saying, hey, you know what? We're going to stop dating women. That's fucking nuts. Secondly, there's dudes like Andrew Tate. So Andrew Tate is 36, 37 years old. And there's a few things that he's done and he talks about which are very sensible. Number one is he got himself into shape. He became a world champion kickboxer, so he can take care of himself and his family. Number two is he was poor and he worked hard and he became successful, he became rich. All of those are good. He tells men to go get in shape, think for themselves, become successful, and all that is good. I support all that. What I don't support is he is a manipulative piece of shit in some ways. He goes after women. And he used women to become sex workers and models for him to make his money in the first place. I got no respect for that. Sorry, that's fucked. I don't give a fuck what you think. That's bad, in my opinion. And on top of that, this is a dude who slept with hundreds, if not thousands, of women. Good for him at one level. But there's got to be a point at which, as a man, you want to stop sleeping with a whole bunch of women. You want to get married and have kids. Right? You want to get married and have kids.
I wouldn't even say good for him. Like, you can say good for him if you want for that, Nicky. I'm not going to say good for him because that's fucked. I mean, listen, I have two daughters. No.
Yeah, 100%. You got two daughters. You wouldn't want some dude like him getting them when they're teenagers. It's terrible.
Nope.
I get it. No, but look, and I'm also going to tell you, I got two sons, and they're going to be teenagers, just like my sons are teenagers. Your daughters are teenagers. Good luck to you, pal. That's all I'm going to say to you, man. When they're teenagers, good luck to you. Because whether you like it or not, they're still girls and they got hormones. So rock and roll.
Of course. There's nothing wrong with that. I just think that any element of encouraging somebody to sleep with 1,000 different people, there's just nothing. There's no backing to support that actually is going to assist your life whatsoever, but all of the backing is in the opposite. There's so much information, data, scientific evidence, everything that shows that if you do that, you're giving a part of yourself away when you're doing all this. So anyway, that being said,
as a man, it's a little bit different. As a man, it's a little bit different. You can sleep with women, and it does not have to be a love-based thing for a man. A man can just sleep with a girl for the purpose of sleeping with her. It's not going to impact him emotionally. For a woman, I think it's terrible to sleep with a lot of men. It's the worst thing that she can do to herself.
I disagree with you. absolutely disagree with you on this point, which
And
is
that's
fine. We
fine.
can disagree. That's why we're here. But
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
there's something
It's
that I
all
would
good.
encourage you to look into, Nikki, that might be interesting. Is there's this concept called soul ties, and it's from a religious. You said already that you're Christian, so you might be interested in it
I am.
because from a religious setting, and it basically talks about how like when you become intimate with somebody, male or female, you are giving away a part of your soul when you're doing this, and you kind of have to recoup that after you've done it for a while. So anyway, we won't talk about it anymore. It's a
Listen,
really interesting concept, though.
I,
I'll throw it in the show notes for anybody that's listening right now that wants to read about that, because I just think it's fascinating. I'm not a prude by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not saying, hey, sleep with one person forever. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, though, is it's important to know and to have knowledge as you're going into this, how this is going to affect you. So anyway, though, let's get back to Andrew Tate, because we could go off on this topic for a while.
Listen. I'm not a virgin. I've slept with a bunch of women in my life, not 1,000, but not one or two either. And the truth of the matter is, looking back right now, I wish that I had met the love of my life when I was 16, 17 years old, and she'd been the only woman I ever slept with. That's the truth. But
yeah,
as a 17-year-old, that's not what I thought. That's not what I thought. As a 17-year-old, I thought, let me get her and her and her and her and her. People go through the process that they go. In 100 years ago, fathers and mothers would shield their daughters from men, young men who, have sexually predatory instincts. Let's be honest, they do. And they would make sure that they were chaperoned on dates and that they didn't go sleep with a bunch of guys, which I think was to the good. And young men were admonished by their fathers to be gentlemen and not cads and not the kind of person who'd go out to do that. And there's a lot of good to that. There's a lot of fucking good to that, to teaching people those kinds of things. So anyways, coming back to Andrew Tate. So Andrew Tate teaches people to go be in a relationship, teaches men to go be in a relationship. And he says, if you're a high value man and you go sleep with women other than your wife will be okay with it. And I'm like, what fucking universe are you living in, pal? Because I can tell you right now, I'm a so-called high-value man. I'm successful. I'm, for my age, good-looking man. I'm articulate, charming. If I went and slept with another woman, my woman would cut my balls off in my fucking sleep. Okay? That's a fucking fact. She would. And no, she'd say, okay, that's okay, honey. Why don't you go to sleep? And that's all there is to it. And Andrew Tate thinks a woman's okay with you. A woman who has given you her heart, her soul, and her pussy. And just you. You think she's okay with you sharing your dick with other pussy? You are wrong, brother. You are wrong. And teaching young men.
I would ask.
Teaching young men that this is okay is why I have an issue with Andrew Tate. If you're in a long-term committed fucking relationship, keep your dick zipped up in your pants, except for the woman that you want a long-term committed relationship with. That's the problem with Andrew Tate. And people like him.
I agree. And I think the other thing that I just want to bring up with this too, Nikki, which I agree with you here, is that the question I would also ask in this scenario is, what does that say about that woman? What does it say about the woman? What does it say about the woman that if I'm with this woman and I'm in a committed long-term relationship and she's okay with me going out and sleeping with everyone around town?
He's wrong. She's not. She's not. I can tell you there's not a single woman that I know who's really okay with it. Now, some women who are younger, who are maybe not as confident in themselves, might go, oh my God, I don't want to lose him for a little while.
That's what I'm saying. That's my point.
But after a while, after you've slept with 2 or 3 other women, they're going to say, you know what? This ain't working for me. Thank you. Bye.
I agree. Because I've again, full honesty, vulnerability. This is failure. We talk about stuff in real time. I'll be the first to admit I've been in those relationships before, and I've been with those women that say that they're okay with it, and I've gone and slept with other women, and I've done that before in my life. Not super proud of it, but I've done it. And one thing that I will say from my own personal experience is that either the woman isn't really okay with it, even though they say they are, or they think they are, But then my question starts becoming, well, is this the type of woman then that I want to be with? Because if I'm not actually acting like true masculinity, I don't think true masculinity is out there just to fuck as many women as possible. To me, that's not true masculinity because that's not taking care of women. And women are our sisters. And especially if you have a religious context, there are sisters in God, right? So that is not true masculinity. But then what I would also say is that is she really living out her true femininity if she's actually okay with this, or at least pretending to
She's
be
not
okay
okay
with
with
this?
it, bro. She's not okay with
I
it.
don't think so either.
She's
Not
not.
at the end of the day.
Not
No.
one woman, not one fucking woman is okay with her man sleeping with other women. Not one. She may say she is, and there are some women that are pretty fucked up out there. Let's be honest. Just like there's some men that are pretty fucked up out there, but that's not a good thing. I don't
Yeah.
agree with the Andrew Tates of this world teaching men this type of bullshit, and that's to me part of what's wrong. We got on the one hand these anti-man, anti-masculinity forces that are fucking causing massive problems in our society at a global scale, and on the other hand, we've got these false prophets that are teaching men about a masculinity that isn't really very helpful to them. Not at
Oh,
all.
okay, so back to our whole toxic I'm putting in quotes, right? Sorry, for anyone that's listening and not watching, I'm putting this in quotes every single thing I'm saying toxic, because I agree with you. I don't think I don't love the phrase. But instead of toxic masculine guys, I love what you just said, Nikki. How about false prophets, right? Like guys that are pretending to explain and express and be true masculine men that aren't. That's not masculinity. They're
No,
coming under the guise of masculinity, but that's not masculinity.
no.
I agree with you. Has masculinity failed us?
Masculinity didn't fail us.
So what failed us?
What failed us, brother, was we didn't have enough critical thinkers pushing back against the forces of destabilization that came into our society and started preaching lies, telling you up was down and down was up. If you read George Orwell's 1984, that's what's
Absolutely.
happened
Yep.
for the last 100 years. And we've had some people push back, but we haven't had society as a whole push back. And to me, that's part of what's wrong. I'll tell you that I'm more hopeful than I've been in a long time because I think those forces have overplayed their hand. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was 12 years old, the Islamic Revolution had already happened in Iran. And we had a fellow who was a prime minister, Bozargan, and he was running for a second term. And it was a bit of a sham election, but they were having an election. And Bozargan was going to win because more people supported him than the other fellow. But the other fellow had the backing of the mullahs, the people in power, the people with the guns. And basically, my father walked into a voting booth with a ballot in his hand, and a guy with a gun said, "Give me that," grabbed the ballot out of his hand in a very intimidating manner, like, "You better do that or else." He filled it out, and he dropped it in the ballot box, and he said, "You can leave now." And so
Talk about voter
Bozargan,
fraud. We talk about voter fraud in this country. We have no idea what voter fraud is compared to that.
no, lost the election. Okay. But there was a lot of shenanigans going on, and I saw it, and my dad told me this is how they're stealing the election. So again, not to be political, but in 2020, I looked at your presidential election, and I have a master's in international politics, economics, business, trade, and I study this stuff. And I've looked at American and Canadian politics and voting and all that stuff. And it was clear to me prior to the election that Donald Trump was going to be reelected. He was about to get 11 million more votes. No American president had increased the number of people voting for him and lost an election ever prior to this. Every president who got more people to vote, that meant people were happy with him, right? In general, not everybody, but people were happy with him. There is something in America called the bellwether counties. There are 19 of them. He won 18 out of 19. The only other time in American history that someone did not win a majority of the bellwether countries was Harry Truman in 1948, who won only 9 and his opponent won 10. So he won 1 less and then he won the election. He's the only other person. So Donald Trump won 18 out of 19. He was leading in a whole bunch of these states, and then there was midnight vote drops. And there were midnight vote drops in Iran for Bazargan's opponent back then too. Midnight fucking vote drops. And I'm looking at this, talking to my people from Iran, and I'm going, you see what's happening here? And they go, oh yeah, this is the same shit they did back in Iran back in the fucking day. And I'm looking at this going, oh, okay. And now this time I go, okay, in America, Canada, at least they don't go after their political opponents and try to throw them in jail, because they actually killed an Iranian presidential candidate, had to leave Iran, go to Paris, and they found him and they killed him there. I mean, that's how bad it got, right? And they're not, but they tried to jail him first. They said he was the enemy of the people and blah, 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 a whole bunch of bullshit. And then I saw, wait a minute, they're fucking arresting their leading opposition candidate. They're arresting him. They're charging him. I'm like, wait a minute, they've never done this in America. What the fuck's going on? And then he got convicted or for paying off a goddamn porn star? Like, okay, that's not a good thing to do. Let me be clear. I would not want that man dating my daughter. Okay, let's just be clear. Let's just be fucking clear on that, right? But come on, man. It's a goddamn payoff to keep a porn star quiet. Are you fucking kidding me? What this is very different than, stealing $1 billion from the government coffers, right? Like that's a big time. There's a night and day fucking difference between those two, right?
Right.
And,
right.
And then I'm going, okay. And then what I saw happen was, like I said, I'm a student of history. In 1941, Admiral Yamamoto, who planned the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which was extremely successful, when they congratulated him, he said, do not congratulate me. I fear that all we have done is awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. And brother, the day that was the guilty verdict for Donald Trump was announced, I felt an energetic shift. People that didn't give a shit about politics, people that were liberal, leftist even. And they were like outraged, like angry. And I saw social media blow up. I saw Twitter, X, whatever, fucking blow up. There were guys who had raised millions for Hillary Clinton who said, I'm going to fucking crawl over broken glass to raise money for and vote for Donald Trump. And one dude who's a big investor in Silicon Valley, Sean something or whatever, he said, I'm going to lose business and friendships over this. And I don't give a shit. I will do whatever it takes to kick this out. America can never be a country where we go after our fucking political opponents and jail them. This can never happen again. A message needs to be sent that we won't allow this. And this is what I think. This is why I have hope. When I see things like this happening, when I see guys like Jocko Willink, David Goggins coming up, I go, there's fucking hope. There's strong men. The hard times have created the strong men, and they're stepping up, man. They're fucking stepping up. And that's why I have hope.
So let me ask you this then, and I appreciate that hope. Gets me all fired up myself. One of the reasons for this podcast is to talk about the midst of these failures and struggles and everything else we go. And we're obviously all focused on masculinity. We're specifically focused on men right now. So take a minute, maybe, please, and speak to the men listening to this or watching this episode right now that maybe feel like they are just failing in their manhood, their masculinity. Like when you're in the middle of that, and I've faced that, you faced that, everybody has faced that, right? And I definitely feel that way at times, and I let other people convince me of that. I'll be the first to admit, I've let social media, propaganda, all that shit convince me of things with that, because it's a very fucking powerful tool. I mean, propaganda media has been used through wars, revolutions, everything else to get people on their side. There's a reason that all of the Nazis, as an example, were so fucking successful, because it was a propaganda machine and it worked so well. And that's not the only place that it's worked. It works in America really well as well. So I guess maybe specifically for American men that feel like they're maybe failing in their manhood or their masculinity, what's your word for them, Nicky?
Very simple. You're a fucking man. You are a warrior and a badass. God created you that way. Maybe you've temporarily fucking forgot. I'm here to remind you who you really are.
I love that. I love that. And Nikki, if you've read a lot of books, so maybe have you read the one about warrior, magician, lover, the 4 attributes of masculinity? Have you read that book before? It's a fantastic
Yeah.
one, I think.
Warrior, king, magician, lover. Yeah, I took a course about that back in
Oh, have you?
2014.
Fantastic. Great. I've talked about it on the podcast before. I'm going to add it to the show notes today as well, because I think it's a really good kind of first step in that. What else for those men, as we're kind of wrapping up here, Nikki? What else? What other word do you have? What kind of last thoughts do you have for the men that you're asking to stand up right now? Like, what practically? What do they do?
You need to find your men. And a good place to do that is I run a men's organization. It's called Sovereign Man, sovereignman.ca. It's a Canadian website. Go check it out. Check out what we're all about. And if you like what you read over there, come find me on social media. I'm the only Nicky Billou in the world, at NICKYBILLOU. And tell me you want to come check out what Sovereign Man does. I'll send you an invite. The website has a whole bunch of podcast episodes we've done. Come on by. Be with men.
I love it.
Men get stronger when they're with other men. Period.
Absolutely. 100%. And for those, again, listening or watching, we're going to have that in the show notes as well. So go check out Nikki's website. Nikki, man, thanks so much for being here today. This has been fantastic. This has been fantastic. I hope it's been good for you. I know it's been good for our listeners and our audience because, man, do we need real men right now? Fuck yeah. And you know, you mentioned a couple of really great men that I think I would agree with you. They show their masculinity in a very healthy way and very strong way. And you know, masculinity to me does not mean that that there's certain images of being a man or masculine that we're not talking about, right? Again, go read the book, go do some research, listen to this more, because there are men that appear, you know, softer, let's say, that are real men. There are men that appear harder that are real men. That doesn't mean that you're a man, but are you standing up for what you're believing in? Are you standing against the tyranny, against the propaganda, against all the bullshit that's out there? The whole reason for this podcast is to deal with our shit real time. Are you anti all the success bullshit that people are trying to put off, or this quote unquote, you know, these false prophets? Yeah, fuck that, man. Fuck that. Anything else you want to say before we end today to these guys?
No, man, I think we've said what we need to say. So take action, man. Take action.
Perfect. I love it. So thanks to everybody. Again, as usual, thanks for listening, for watching. Please check out Nicky Billou's information. Check out the show notes. Reach out to me as well. My email's in the show notes. I will answer every single email that I receive, and we really appreciate you. So subscribe, like, as usual. Send this to a man. Send this to a man that you feel is kind of going through some struggles, through some failures, through some just not sure in his own head about what being a man is. Send this podcast to him, man. This is the best place to start. Get the conversation rolling. Have a conversation. Call a guy friend right now and have a conversation about this if you're listening to it. If you're a woman, do the same thing. Go, if you know men in your life, your husband, your spouse, your father, your friend, whatever, and they are a man and they show their masculine traits in a healthy way, go thank them, because we need more guys like that. So check out Sovereign Man. Nicky, again, thank you so much for being here. And we'll say later until next time. See you later, you derelicts.